Okay, so Mozambique just had an election, and, well, their ruling party, Frelimo, won again.
Again?
Yeah, they've been in power for decades.
Oh.
But this time, things aren't so straightforward.
Really?
Yeah, there are accusations of fraud and violence, even killings.
Oh, my.
And now, a regional organization called SADC, Southern African Development Community,
Right.
they're facing some tough questions about, their role in all of this.
Interesting.
So we're diving into this article from the East African.
Okay.
It's called, Did SADC Drop the Ball in Mozambique Polls?
Makes sense.
To try and figure out what exactly happened and what it means for democracy in the region.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it really makes you think about the state of democracy in Southern Africa as a whole. This isn't just, like an isolated incident. It feels like part of a much bigger trend that we're seeing across the region.
Right, exactly. So to set the stage, Frelimo's candidate, Daniel Chapo, he won with a landslide.
Landslide.
Yeah, over 70% of the vote. He's set to take over from the outgoing president, Felipe Nyusi. But the thing is, the opposition candidate, Venancio Mondlane from the Podemos party,
Okay.
he's claiming that he actually won.
Oh, wow.
That the whole election was rigged. And to make matters even worse, shortly after the election, Mondlane's legal advisor
Right.
and a representative from his party, they were killed.
Oh, no.
Which raises huge concerns about the safety of anyone who, dares to challenge the ruling party.
Absolutely. It's a chilling thought. And it adds another layer of complexity to an already tense situation.
For sure. It's incredibly disturbing. And it's even more unsettling when you consider that the EU observer mission, they also pointed to irregularities, like altered results and things like that,
I see.
which lends credibility to the opposition's claims. But here's the thing that I find really strange. Right in the middle of all this chaos, one voice has been strangely silent. SADC.
SADC.
Yeah, the Southern African Development Community. They're a regional bloc that Mozambique belongs to.
Right, right.
And you'd think they'd be, at the forefront of addressing these concerns, about the election. But so far, they've been strangely silent on the violence and the allegations of fraud.
Why do you think that is? Are they turning a blind eye to what's happening?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. And to make things even weirder, Zimbabwe's president, Mnangagwa, who just so happens to be the SADC chairperson.
Right.
He actually endorsed Frelimo's victory before the official results were even announced.
So before?
Yeah, before.
It's like they'd already made up their minds, regardless of any evidence.
Exactly. And this preemptive endorsement really raises questions about SADC's impartiality, Are they really committed to a fair democratic process?
It's not a good look.
Right. It's not just about one election. It's about the integrity of democratic processes, across the entire region.
Right.
So let's look into SADC's role a bit deeper, specifically their observation mission for this election. They sent a team to observe, how things were going. Sounds good in theory. But
It's good, bud.
there's a big but here.
What is it?
Borges Namir, he's a security expert at the Institute for Security Studies.
Okay.
He pointed out that their observation mission was shockingly inadequate.
Really?
Yeah. They only covered something like 1% of the polling stations.
1% for the whole country.
1% for the whole country.
Wow. That's hardly a comprehensive assessment. How can you possibly judge the fairness of an election, by observing such a tiny fraction of the polling stations?
It's like trying to understand the entire ocean by looking at a single drop of water.
Right. And to make matters worse, the person leading the mission was Amani Abid Karume.
Okay.
He's the former president of Zanzibar. Well, he has his own history with, let's just say, allegations of election misconduct.
So not exactly the most impartial observer. So it makes you wonder, was SADC truly invested in making sure the election was free and fair?
It certainly raises some eyebrows.
Yeah. So with all this criticism, how has SADC responded?
Well, their executive secretary, Elias Magosi, he defended their approach.
What did he say?
He said that SADC doesn't believe in using a carrot and stick approach. They prefer to encourage member states to follow the guidelines.
But there's no way to actually enforce them.
Right.
It sounds like that's a recurring issue for SADC. Remember the 2023 elections in Zimbabwe? SADC ended up endorsing the results, but their own observer mission had concerns.
Right. They questioned whether the election met SADC's own standard.
Exactly. And now it seems like we're seeing the same pattern repeat in Mozambique. And to top it off, Botswana has elections coming up.
Oh.
Yeah, and there are already concerns about whether they'll be credible.
So it seems like there's a trend here where Potential problems are being overlooked.
It begs the question, is SADC equipped to really safeguard democracy in Southern Africa?
It's a huge question. And it makes you think about the bigger picture. If regional bodies like SADC aren't able to uphold democratic norms, what does that mean for democracy on a global scale? It's something to think about.
It's a big one, that's for sure. If elections aren't free and fair, it really undermines the entire system. It erodes public trust, leads to instability, and can even open the door to violence and human rights abuses.
And tragically, we're already seeing those consequences play out in Mozambique
Yeah.
with the killings of those opposition figures and the suppression of protests.
It really underscores how fragile democracy is and how important it is to protect it.
It certainly does. It really is. I mean, it makes you wonder what democracy really means in practice.
Right. Is it more than just holding elections?
Exactly. Free and fair elections are essential, but they're only one piece of the puzzle. You know, for a democracy to actually thrive, you need a whole ecosystem of checks and balances and strong institutions, and a culture that values, like transparency and accountability.
So where does SADC fit into all of this? I mean, they're supposed to be like a champion for democracy in the region, but are they really?
That's the million-dollar question, and I
Okay.
think to really understand their role, we need to dig into their history a little bit, you know, how they operate.
Okay.
So SADC was formed way back in 1980,
Wow. Okay.
back when a lot of Southern African countries were still fighting for independence from colonial rule.
Gotcha.
And their initial focus was mostly on economic cooperation,
Yeah.
and development. But over time, they've also taken on this mandate to promote peace and security and good governance across the region.
So promoting democracy became part of their mission.
Exactly.
But it seems like there's this disconnect between their goals and their actions, especially in cases like we've seen in Mozambique and Zimbabwe.
Yeah, for sure. And that disconnect raises some tough questions, like why aren't they taking a stronger stance against, electoral misconduct?
Right.
Is it a lack of political will? Are they worried about regional instability? Or could it be something even more complicated, like maybe economic dependence on certain member states?
That's an interesting point. Are they putting stability above democratic principles?
It's possible. I mean, open conflict between member states would be devastating for the whole region.
So it's not just about right and wrong.
Exactly. There are all these other factors at play. And that's why understanding the nuances is so important. It's easy to oversimplify things, but the reality is much more complicated.
So how do we reconcile this? How do we push for stronger democratic standards without, causing more instability?
It's a tough question. I mean, there's no easy answer. But I think one really important step is to increase transparency and accountability within SADC itself. They need to be more open about how they make decisions, especially when it comes to endorsing elections that seem flawed.
So more transparency would allow for more scrutiny. Right.
Right. From civil society, independent observers, the international community. That kind of scrutiny is key for holding them accountable. Because right now it feels like SADC operates in a bit of a black box, and that just leads to more suspicion and mistrust.
Which is never a good thing.
Not at all.
Yeah.
If people start to lose faith in SADC, their ability to be neutral, to defend democracy, it could lead to even more instability down the line.
What do you mean?
Well, imagine if countries started doubting SADC's legitimacy and they decide to go it alone, pursuing their own interests without any regard for regional cooperation.
That could get messy.
It would. It could lead to a fragmentation of Southern Africa, which would have really serious consequences.
So how do we prevent that? What can SADC actually do to build trust and, really become a champion for democracy?
Well, there are a few key things. First, they need to seriously overhaul their election observation missions.
Okay.
Like, they need to make sure those missions are truly independent, comprehensive, and equipped to actually detect and report any irregularities.
So no more 1% coverage.
Right. They need to send enough observers to cover a significant portion of the polling stations. And those observers need to be able to speak freely about what they find, even if it's critical of the government.
Yeah, it's a big change.
It is. It takes a lot of resources, coordination.
Yeah.
But it's an investment worth making.
Yeah.
They also need better mechanisms for dealing with misconduct. Right now, their approach is kind of reactive, and there aren't really consequences.
So less carrot, more stick.
Not necessarily. I think it's about striking a balance. Maybe a system of penalties for member states that don't meet democratic standards, but also support and assistance for those who are genuinely trying to reform.
That sounds more effective.
Right. More proactive.
Yeah.
But it would require a shift in their mindset,
Yeah.
moving away from complacency and being more assertive about democratic principles. That change needs to come from within, like a real commitment to the values SADC says they represent.
It brings us back to the bigger picture, right? SADC is just one example of a regional organization trying to figure out this whole promoting democracy thing.
It's a global issue.
Yeah.
You see the same struggles with the African Union, the Organization of American States, even the European Union.
So what does this all mean for the future of democracy then?
That's the question that keeps me up at night. If regional organizations like SADC can't live up to their promises, it could have a ripple effect. We could see democratic values decline, more authoritarianism, a world where the will of the people just doesn't matter as much.
That's kind of depressing. But can we do anything about it? Like, as individuals?
Absolutely.
Whoa.
We can't just sit back and watch. We have to educate ourselves, support organizations that are fighting for democracy, and hold our own leaders accountable.
So be informed, be engaged, be active citizens.
Exactly. The future of democracy depends on all of us.
That's a powerful message. So speaking of powerful messages, what about the situation inside Mozambique itself? We've talked a lot about SADC, but what's the mood like, on the ground? How are people reacting to the election and all the controversy?
That's a great question. And it's a crucial part of the story.
Yeah, what's going on over there?
Well, it's pretty complicated, to be honest. You have to remember that Mozambique has been under Frelimo rule for a really long time.
A long...
Since 1975.
Wow.
Almost 50 years. So for a lot of Mozambicans, this is the only government they've ever experienced.
Wow, 50 years. That's a long time for one party to be in power. It must have a big influence on, everything.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Frelimo is really entrenched, like in the institutions, the economy.
Right.
And while there have been some, democratic reforms over the years, it's still a tough environment for opposition parties.
So it sounds like Frelimo has a pretty tight grip on power.
Yeah.
But what about the people? Are they happy with the status quo or, are they looking for something different?
Well, I think there's definitely some frustration out there and a sense of disillusionment.
Yeah.
Particularly among younger Mozambicans.
Okay.
They're looking for more opportunities, a bigger say in their future.
It makes sense. A new generation, new ideas.
Right. And we see that reflected in the growing support for opposition parties like Podemos.
Okay.
And then it's Satsyoman Lane, despite the challenges he's faced,
Right.
he represents this new generation of leadership.
Yeah.
And his message of change, it resonates with a lot of people, especially in urban areas.
But it sounds like it's an uphill battle, right? Going up against this really powerful ruling party.
It's not easy, for sure. I mean, the opposition, they have limited resources, they face media bias, and sometimes even violence and intimidation, like we saw with the killings.
Right.
It's a reminder of the risks people take when they challenge the people in power, especially in a country where democracy is still developing.
Yeah, definitely.
And those risks can make people afraid to speak out, to support the opposition.
So what's the outlook? Is there any hope for real change? Or is Frelimo's grip on power just too strong?
I think it's too early to tell. Mozambique's at a crossroads.
Yeah.
And what happens next, how SADC handles things, it could have a big impact.
So what should we be looking for? What are some signs, that things might be moving in the right direction?
Well, I think it's important to watch whether Frelimo, takes any steps to address the problems, to create a fairer system.
Like what?
Will they investigate the fraud allegations? Will they hold the people responsible for the violence accountable? Will they implement reforms to make future elections more transparent?
Those are big questions. If they show a willingness to change, that would be a positive sign.
Right. And another thing to watch is the response of civil society and the international community.
Okay.
Will they keep up the pressure? Will they support the groups that are pushing for democracy?
So it all comes down to pressure from inside and outside Mozambique.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, the future of Mozambique is in the hands of its people.
Of course.
But international support is really important, to help them through this difficult time and work towards a more democratic and prosperous future.
Makes sense. So I guess our big takeaway from this deep dive is that the situation in Mozambique is super complex.
Yeah.
It's about this specific election, but it's also about the future of democracy in the whole region.
And for anyone listening, it's a reminder that these issues, even though they might feel far away, they're connected to global trends. The struggle for democracy is happening everywhere, and we all need to pay attention and be engaged.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play.
Exactly.
Well, that's it for this episode. We encourage you to learn more about what we've talked about and, have those important conversations. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.